What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest legends loses her cool on live television? In just 34 seconds, everything fell apart. Subscribe now for daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals. Last night on The View, what started as a simple conversation turned into one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Cher sat down with the hosts, and nobody could have predicted the absolute chaos that was about to unfold. The music icon walked onto the stage wearing her signature all-black outfit, sunglasses perched on her head, and that unmistakable confidence she's carried for decades. The audience went wild, cheering and clapping as she took her seat at the table. Behar smiled widely, welcoming her to the show. "Cher, thank you so much for being here today," Joy said, still grinning. "We're so excited to have you." Cher nodded, settling into her chair. "Thanks for having me." The conversation started off normal enough. They talked about her recent projects, her music, and some of the charity work she'd been doing. Cher answered every question with her usual honesty and humor. The other hosts laughed at her jokes. Everything seemed perfectly fine. But then Joy shifted topics. "So Cher, I have to ask," Joy said, leaning forward slightly. "You've been very vocal on social media about politics lately. Some people think celebrities should just stick to entertainment. What do you say to that?" The atmosphere in the studio changed immediately. Cher's expression hardened just a little bit. She tilted her head and looked directly at Joy. "I say that's ridiculous," Cher replied firmly. "I'm a citizen. I have every right to speak my mind about what's happening in this country. Just because I'm famous doesn't mean I should shut up." Joy nodded, but there was something in her tone when she responded. Of course, but don't you think sometimes celebrities can be a little out of touch? I mean, you live in a completely different world than most Americans." Cher's jaw tightened. "Out of touch? Joy, I grew up poor. I know what it's like to struggle. I've worked my entire life to get where I am. Don't talk to me about being out of touch." The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. You could feel the tension building in the room. The audience had gone completely silent, watching this unfold. Joy held up her hands defensively. "I'm not attacking you personally, Cher. I'm just saying that maybe regular people don't want to hear political opinions from someone who flies on private jets. And who the hell are you to decide what regular people want to hear?" Cher shot back, her voice rising. "You sit here every day giving your opinions. You think you're any different from me?" "I'm a journalist," Joy responded, her own voice getting louder. "That's literally my job." Cher let out a sharp laugh. "A journalist? Please. You're on a talk show, Joy. Don't act like you're reporting from a war zone." The studio went dead quiet. Nobody moved. The camera operators kept filming, capturing every second of this disaster unfolding in real time. Joy's face flushed red. "Excuse me? I've been doing this for decades. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, and some of the most important people on the planet. Don't you dare diminish my career." "Then don't diminish mine," Cher fired back immediately. "You brought me on this show to talk, and now you're upset because I'm actually talking. Make up your damn mind." One of the other hosts tried to jump in, attempting to calm things down. "Ladies, maybe we should—" "No," Cher interrupted, holding up her hand. "Let Joy finish. She clearly has something she wants to say to me." Joy leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "I just think it's interesting that you can dish it out on Twitter all day long, but the second someone questions you, you get defensive." "Defensive?" Cher's voice was incredulous. "You basically just called me an out-of-touch elitist on your show. What did you expect me to do? Smile and thank you?" "I expected you to have an actual conversation like an adult," Joy snapped. That was it. That was the moment everything exploded. Cher stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. "Are you serious right now? You've been condescending to me since I sat down. Don't act like I'm the problem here." Joy stood up too, facing her across the table. "I've been doing my job. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't come on talk shows." "Tough questions?" Cher laughed bitterly. "You haven't asked me one tough question. All you've done is insult me and then act shocked when I respond." The producers were frantically gesturing from off stage, trying to get someone's attention to cut to commercial. But nobody was listening. This train had left the station. "You know what your problem is?" Joy continued. pointing her finger at Cher. You think because you're Cher, because you've had this long career, that you can say whatever you want without consequences. And you think because you have this platform, you can tear people down and call it journalism. Cher shouted back. The audience gasped. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others had pulled out their phones and were recording everything. I am not tearing you down, Joy yelled. I'm asking legitimate questions that millions of people want answered. No, you're being a bitch, Cher exploded. There's a difference between asking questions and being deliberately antagonistic, and you know it. The entire studio erupted. The audience started murmuring loudly. The other hosts looked absolutely stunned, frozen in their seats like they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Joy's face went from red to almost purple. How dare you come on my show and talk to me like that? Your show? Cher shouted. Last time I checked, this was called The View, not The Joy Behar Show. And maybe if you showed your guests some respect, they wouldn't have to call you out on your bullshit. One of the producers finally ran onto the stage, trying to intervene. But it was way too late for that. The damage was done. You need to leave, Joy said, her voice shaking with anger. Right now. Get off my stage. Cher laughed, but there was no humor in it. Gladly. I don't need to sit here and be disrespected by someone who thinks they're better than everyone else. I never said I was better than anyone, Joy protested. You didn't have to say it. Cher shot back. Your attitude says it all. You look down on me because I didn't go to journalism school or whatever the hell you did. Well, guess what? I don't need a degree to know when someone's being fake. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Cher wasn't done. You invited me here because you knew my name would get ratings, Cher continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. But you didn't want an actual conversation. You wanted to make me look stupid so you could feel superior. Well, congratulations, Joy. You got your moment. That is not what this was about, Joy insisted, but her voice sounded less certain now. Yes, it was, Cher said firmly. Own it. At least have the guts to own it. The two women stared at each other across the table. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Everyone in the studio held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Get out, Joy said again. Quieter this time, but somehow more intense. I mean it, Cher. Leave. Cher grabbed her purse from beside her chair. I told you already. I'm going. You don't have to tell me twice. She started walking toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly on the floor. The cameras followed her every move. Just before she reached the edge of the stage, she turned back around. You know what the saddest part is? Cher called out. I actually used to respect you, Joy. I thought you were tough and honest. But now I see you're just another person who tears others down to make themselves feel important. Joy's hands were shaking. Get the hell out of here. I'm gone, Cher yelled back. And then she walked off the stage, disappearing behind the curtain. The studio sat in absolute stunned silence for a few seconds. Nobody knew what to say or do. Joy stood at the table, breathing heavily, looking like she might explode again at any second. Finally, one of the producers yelled to cut to commercial. The cameras stopped rolling. But everyone in that studio knew they had just witnessed something that would be talked about for years. The other hosts slowly stood up, looking at Joy with expressions that ranged from shock to concern. What the hell just happened? One of them whispered. Nobody had an answer. The confrontation had escalated so fast, so intensely, that it felt like a bomb had gone off. 1 minute they were having what seemed like a normal interview, and the next, one of the biggest stars in the world was storming off the stage after an all-out screaming match with the host. Backstage, crew members scrambled around in chaos. Some were trying to figure out if they should go after Cher. Others were checking to make sure all the footage had been captured. Everyone was talking at once, their voices blending into a mess of confusion and disbelief. Did she really just call Joy a bitch on live television? Someone asked. This is going to be everywhere in 5 minutes, another person said, already pulling out their phone. Back on the stage, Joy was still standing there, her face a mixture of anger and shock. She looked at the other hosts, then at the audience, which was buzzing with whispered conversations. Well, Joy finally said, trying to compose herself. That was something. The audience didn't know how to respond. A few people clapped awkwardly. Others just sat there with their mouths open. It was clear that nobody had expected this level of drama when they bought tickets to see a taping of The View. In her dressing room, Cher was already packing up her things. Her assistant stood nearby, phone in hand, looking worried. "That was intense," the assistant said carefully. Cher zipped up her bag with more force than necessary. "She came at me from the start. What did she expect? That I'd just sit there and take it?" "I know, but nothing," Cher interrupted. "I've been in this business too long to let people push me around. Joy wanted a show. She got one." Her phone started buzzing nonstop. Texts, calls, social media notifications all flooding in at once. Word was already spreading about what had happened. Videos from audience members were probably already being uploaded. This was going to be the biggest story in entertainment news. Back in the studio, they were trying to salvage what was left of the show. Joy had sat back down, but she still looked rattled. The other hosts were doing their best to move on to the next segment, but it was obvious nobody's heart was in it anymore. "Should we address what just happened?" one of the hosts asked during the commercial break. Joy shook her head. "No. We move on. Act like everything's normal." But everyone knew nothing about this was normal. This wasn't a simple disagreement or a tense moment that could be smoothed over with a joke and a commercial break. This was a full-blown meltdown between two powerful women, broadcast live for the world to see. The production assistants were already getting calls from news outlets wanting comments. The show's social media accounts were blowing up. Everyone wanted to know what had caused such an epic confrontation. People were taking sides, debating who was right and who was wrong. Out in the parking lot, Cher's car pulled up. She put on her sunglasses, threw her bag in the back seat, and got in without looking back at the building. As the car drove away, she could see people gathering outside with their phones up, trying to catch a glimpse of her. "Take me home," she told her driver, "and make sure nobody follows us." The driver nodded and pulled out into traffic. Cher sat back in her seat, her adrenaline still pumping from the confrontation. Part of her couldn't believe what had just happened. She'd been on hundreds of talk shows over her decades-long career. She'd dealt with difficult hosts before, but something about Joy's attitude had pushed her over the edge. Maybe it was the condescension. Maybe it was being called out of touch after she'd worked so hard to get where she was. Maybe it was just the fact that she was tired of being treated like her opinions didn't matter just because she was a celebrity. Whatever it was, something had snapped. Her phone rang. It was her publicist. "Don't," Cher said before the publicist could even speak. "I don't want to hear it." "Cher, the video is everywhere. It's the #1 trending topic on every platform. We need to discuss how to handle this." "There's nothing to handle," Cher said firmly. "I'm not apologizing. Joy was disrespectful, and I called her out on it. End of story." "But the network." "I don't care about the network," Cher interrupted. "If they have a problem with me standing up for myself, that's their issue, not mine." She hung up the phone and turned it off completely. She didn't want to deal with any more calls or messages. She just wanted to go home, decompress, and process everything that had happened. Meanwhile, back at The View, they had somehow managed to finish the rest of the show. But it was painful to watch. The hosts tried to act normal, but the energy was completely off. The audience could barely pay attention to anything else. Everyone was still thinking about the explosive confrontation they'd witnessed. When the show finally ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Joy immediately left the stage without talking to anyone. She went straight to her dressing room and closed the door. Inside, she sat down heavily in her chair and put her head in her hands. Had she pushed too hard? Had she been condescending? She replayed the conversation in her head, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. But the more she thought about it, the more defensive she felt. She was just doing her job, asking questions that needed to be asked. It wasn't her fault that Cher couldn't handle it, but deep down, a small voice questioned whether that was really true. Outside the studio, news vans were already pulling up. Reporters were setting up cameras, preparing to do live shots about the confrontation. Entertainment websites were publishing articles with headlines like "Cher and Joy Behar's epic fight" and "The View's most explosive moment ever." Social media was absolutely on fire. People were sharing clips, making memes, and passionately defending their favorite celebrity. Some people thought Cher was completely in the right for standing up to Joy's questioning. Others thought she overreacted and should have handled it more professionally. The debate raged on across every platform. Celebrity commentators started weighing in with their own opinions. Former View hosts were being asked to comment. Entertainment journalists were analyzing every word of the confrontation, breaking it down second by second. This wasn't just a talk show moment anymore. This was a cultural event. And at the center of it all were two women who had probably never imagined their conversation would end in such spectacular fashion. Cher, the legendary performer who had survived decades in the entertainment industry and wasn't about to let anyone disrespect her. And Joy, the veteran talk show host who prided herself on asking tough questions, now facing criticism for how she had handled one of the biggest guests in television history. The confrontation lasted only a few minutes, but the impact would be felt for much longer. Every word that was said, every angry exchange, every sharp comeback, it was all captured on camera and would be replayed over and over again. In her car, Cher finally turned her phone back on. The messages flooded in immediately. Friends, family, colleagues, everyone wanted to know if she was okay. Some people praised her for standing her ground. Others expressed concern about how this might affect her image. But Cher wasn't worried about her image. She'd built a career on being honest and authentic. If people didn't like that she called out someone for being disrespectful, then those weren't people whose opinions she valued anyway. She thought about Joy and wondered if the host was reflecting on what had happened. Did Joy understand why Cher had gotten so upset? Did she realize that her questions had crossed a line from journalism into something more personal and judgmental? Probably not, Cher decided. People like Joy rarely thought they were wrong about anything. That was part of the problem. They were so convinced of their own righteousness that they couldn't see when they were actually being hurtful or unfair. The car pulled up to Cher's house. She got out, thanked her driver, and went inside. The quiet of her home was a welcome relief after the chaos of the studio. She poured herself a drink and sat down on her couch, finally allowing herself to fully process what had happened. Had she handled it perfectly? Probably not. Could she have kept her cool better? Maybe. But she wasn't going to beat herself up over it. Joy had provoked her, intentionally or not, and Cher had responded honestly. That's all there was to it. Her assistant called. "Do you want me to draft a statement?" "No statement," Cher said. "What happened, happened. People can make up their own minds about it. I'm not going to sit here and try to spin it into something it wasn't." "Okay," the assistant said hesitantly. "But you should know that people are really divided on this. Some are calling you a hero for standing up to Joy. Others are saying you were disrespectful." "Let them say whatever they want," Cher replied. "I've been famous long enough to know that no matter what I do, someone's going to criticize it. I can't live my life worrying about what other people think." She hung up and took a sip of her drink. Tomorrow, there would be more articles, more commentary, more people trying to dissect every aspect of the confrontation. But tonight, she was just going to rest and remind herself why she'd reacted the way she did. She wasn't some young starlet who could be pushed around. She wasn't going to sit quietly while someone implied she didn't deserve to have opinions. And she damn sure wasn't going to let Joy Behar or anyone else make her feel small. Back at the studio, the staff was in cleanup mode. They were fielding calls from the network executives trying to explain what had happened. Some people were worried about potential lawsuits or public relations disasters. Others were secretly thrilled because they knew this would be the most watched episode of The View in years. Joy had finally emerged from her dressing room. She looked tired and stressed. One of the producers approached her carefully. "Joy, we need to talk about how to address this tomorrow." Joy nodded slowly. "I know. We'll figure something out." But what could she say? Sorry for asking tough questions? That would make her look weak. But if she doubled down on her position, she'd look like she couldn't admit when she was wrong. It was a no-win situation. She thought about calling Cher, trying to smooth things over privately. But what would she even say? The words they'd exchanged had been said. The damage was done. There was no taking it back now. As she walked to her car, Joy felt a mix of emotions. Anger, definitely. Embarrassment, for sure. But also, if she was being totally honest with herself, a tiny bit of regret. Maybe she had pushed too hard. Maybe her questions had been more pointed than necessary. Maybe she'd let her own ego get in the way of having an actual conversation. But admitting that, even to herself, felt like defeat. And Joy Behar didn't do defeat. She got in her car and drove home. knowing that tomorrow would bring a whole new wave of attention and scrutiny. The confrontation with Cher would be analyzed from every possible angle. People would debate it for days, maybe weeks. And somewhere in all of that noise, the truth of what actually happened, two strong-willed women clashing over respect and professionalism, would probably get lost. But that's how it always went in the world of celebrity and media. The spectacle was more important than the substance. The drama was more valuable than the details. And a 34-second confrontation would be remembered long after the actual words that were said had been forgotten. Cher finished her drink and stood up. She was done thinking about it for tonight. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But right now, she was going to take a hot shower, put on comfortable clothes, and watch something mindless on television. As she walked upstairs, she couldn't help but smile a little bit. Despite everything, despite the chaos and the drama and the inevitable headlines, she didn't regret what she'd done. She'd stood up for herself. She'd refused to be talked down to. And if that made her difficult or temperamental or whatever other labels people wanted to throw at her, so be it. She was Cher. She'd survived this long by being authentic and refusing to play games. And she wasn't about to change now, no matter who it pissed off. The night grew quiet. In homes across the country, people were still talking about what they'd witnessed on The View. Friends were texting each other clips. Families were debating at dinner tables. Co-workers were already planning water cooler conversations for the next day. The confrontation had captured something that people couldn't look away from. Maybe it was the rawness of it. Maybe it was seeing two powerful women refuse to back down. Maybe it was just the shock of watching something so unscripted and real happen on live television. Whatever it was, everyone agreed on one thing. They'd never seen anything quite like it before. And they probably wouldn't see anything like it again for a long time. The View's producers were already planning their response strategy. They'd have to address it on tomorrow's show. Maybe Joy would explain her side. Maybe they'd show the clip and let the other hosts weigh in. Or maybe they'd try to move on quickly and hope the story died down. But deep down, everyone knew this wasn't going away anytime soon. In the entertainment industry, moments like this were rare. Real, unfiltered confrontations between celebrities almost never happened in such a public way. Usually, people kept their anger behind closed doors. They smiled for the cameras and saved their real feelings for private conversations. But Cher and Joy had given everyone a glimpse behind the curtain. They'd shown the world what happens when professional courtesy breaks down and real emotions take over. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't comfortable. But it was absolutely riveting. As midnight approached, the story was still spreading. International news outlets were picking it up. Morning show producers were planning segments about it. Late-night comedians were writing jokes. The confrontation had taken on a life of its own, growing bigger with each passing hour. And at the center of it all were just two women who'd had a really bad conversation that spiraled completely out of control. Cher was in bed now, her phone finally silent after she'd put it on Do Not Disturb mode. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment when she'd stood up and decided she'd had enough. There was no going back from that point. Once she'd stood, once she'd raised her voice, the situation could only go one direction. Had it been worth it? She asked herself that question honestly. The answer was yes. Because staying quiet, accepting disrespect just to keep the peace, that wasn't who she was. That wasn't who she'd ever been. She'd built her entire career on refusing to be anyone other than herself. And if that sometimes meant confrontations and burned bridges, well, that was just the cost of authenticity. Across town, Joy was also awake, unable to sleep. She kept thinking about Cher's words. You're just another person who tears others down to make themselves feel important. Was that true? Did she do that? Joy had always thought of herself as fearless, willing to ask the questions nobody else would ask. But maybe somewhere along the way, fearlessness had turned into something else, something less noble. She thought about her history with guests, all the interviews she'd done over the years. How many times had she prioritized getting a reaction over having a real conversation? How many people had left her show feeling the way Cher probably felt right now? These were uncomfortable questions, and Joy didn't particularly want to answer them. But they were there now, planted in her mind by Cher's accusations, and ignoring them wouldn't make them go away. The night stretched on. While most people slept, The video of the confrontation continued to spread across the internet, gaining millions of views. People watched it over and over, each time finding some new detail to discuss or debate. It had everything people loved about drama. Two famous people, high emotions, sharp words, and a dramatic ending. It was better than any scripted television show because it was real. These weren't actors playing roles. This was genuine conflict between two powerful personalities who refused to back down. And that's what made it so compelling. As the sun started to rise on a new day, both Cher and Joy woke up to face the aftermath of their confrontation. Neither of them knew exactly what the day would bring, but both knew that their lives had changed in those few intense minutes on The View's stage. The confrontation was over, but the story was just beginning.